Welcome to this explainer, brought to you by Storywise as part of their Authors of the Month series. Today, we're going to dive into how three absolute titans of literature, all Nobel and Pulitzer Prize winners, fundamentally shaped our understanding of existence. We are talking about Alice Munro, Cormac McCarthy, and Pablo Neruda. Now, these aren't just authors who spun good yarns. They were literal architects of the human experience. As we'll see, each of them used language in incredibly distinct ways to project their own private difficulties into shared public lessons about human growth. So, here's our roadmap. We're going to kick things off with Masters of the Word, move into Munro's Magic in the Mundane, then pivot over to McCarthy, the Architect of the Apocalypse, and explore Neruda's Solitude and Shared Destiny. And finally, we'll wrap the whole thing up with the gift to read. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Masters of the Word. You know, it's actually kind of wild how two brilliant writers can look at the exact same human condition and pull out completely opposite reflections. Right off the bat, we're hitting a stark contrast between Alice Munro and Cormac McCarthy. Munro's quiet focus is super heavily trained on the intimate, ordinary, even banal lives of girls and women in rural Canada. Meanwhile, McCarthy projects his vision onto these vast, violent, post-apocalyptic American frontiers. It's like looking through two completely different lenses, yet somehow they both manage to entirely widen the boundaries of our being. Moving on to Section 2, Magic in the Mundane, Alice Munro. Often affectionately called the Canadian Chekhov, Munro meticulously maps out everyday life. She proves without a doubt that you really don't need explosive adventures to capture profound truths. The secret sauce here is a technique called narrative focalization. Sounds super academic, right? But basically, instead of just giving us a straight-ahead view, she layers perspectives. She pairs an objective narrator who truthfully records the outside world with an incredibly deep internal narrator who reveals the psychological state of her characters. Critics often say reading Munro is like being enveloped in a fog. You aren't expecting some grand miracle to happen, but by the end, you're just completely shocked by the immense gravity of the fog itself. So you might be wondering, why does manipulating time and perspective matter so much for a short story? Like, why use these flexible, nonlinear timelines instead of just giving us a straightforward A to B plot? Well, Munro herself actually noted that the true meaning of a story doesn't really lend itself to a fixed linear order. She loved to jump around. And academic analysis completely backs up her genius here. By distorting the timeline, flashing back to a random childhood memory or skipping way ahead to a future realization, Munro completely immerses us in her character's psychological reality. Because we get so embedded in that internal focus, the most mundane, banal events suddenly feel earth-shattering. She literally takes the private, everyday difficulties of ordinary life and elevates them to a monumental status. Let's switch gears for Section 3. Architect of the Apocalypse, Cormac McCarthy. Leaving the quiet towns of Ontario behind, we are stepping into the violent frontiers of Cormac McCarthy. Continuing the heavy mythic legacy of writers like Melville and Faulkner, McCarthy was the undisputed master stylist of the extreme. To capture the sheer severity of the American landscape, he leaned heavily on a literary device called polysyndeton. That's basically the swift piling up of conjunctions, using the word and over and over and over, combined with incredibly spare punctuation. I mean, no quotation marks, barely any commas. This stripped-down, relentless piling of words gives his writing this severe, almost biblical rhythm that just pulls you under. But how exactly did he build these intricate, rhythmic worlds? Surprisingly, McCarthy was a total pantser. Meaning he flew by the seat of his pants. He flat out refused to strictly plot his novels. In an interview with Oprah, he famously said that plotting things out would be absolute death to his living characters. Instead, his process was incredibly organic. He'd read widely, mull over his notes, wait for signs, and just write immersively from inside the characters' voices. He trusted himself to write first and then leisurely edit to find the patterns later. And we can actually see the physical evidence of this legendary mulling and editing process preserved in the Whitliff collections down at Texas State University. Their archives house nearly 100 boxes of his drafts, notes, and screenplays. Fun fact, famous works like Cities of the Plain and No Country for Old Men actually started out as unproduced screenplays before he leisurely reworked them into massive best-selling novels. Pretty cool, right? This immersive, patient process birthed absolute masterpieces. The late, great literary critic Harold Bloom even declared McCarthy's harrowing Western saga Blood Meridian as the authentic American apocalyptic novel. Whether he's exploring the lawless borders of the 19th century or the ash-covered dystopian future in The Road, McCarthy absolutely cemented his legacy as the architect of America's bleakest nightmares. He takes our private, visceral fears of survival and projects them outward into universal warnings. All right, moving to Section 4. Solitude and Shared Destiny. Pablo Neruda. For our third act, we're going to look at how literature builds into something globally collective, courtesy of the great Chilean poet and diplomat Pablo Neruda. To truly find his unique voice, Neruda had to go through what's often been described as a season in hell. Back in the late 1920s, he took these poorly paid diplomatic posts across Asia: Rangoon, Calcutta, Ceylon, Batavia. He underwent this agonizing, profound isolation in these far-flung outposts. But here's the thing. That intense introspection became an alchemical laboratory for him, ultimately resulting in his incredible 1933 publication, Residencia en la Tierra 1. And his eccentricity and vision, that extended way beyond the page into the very houses he lived in. His 3 famous homes in Chile served as physical extensions of his poetic soul. La Sebastiana was built to feel like it was literally floating in the air. La Chascona was dedicated to his lover Matilda's untamed red hair, and his absolute favorite, Isla Negra, was built with these tight wooden corridors specifically to mimic the boats and trains he so deeply loved. They weren't just houses, they were creative lifelines. But the ultimate turning point in Neruda's life didn't happen in a house at all. It happened in the freezing wilderness. In 1948, his extreme leftist politics put him in the crosshairs of a dictatorial government. Facing imminent arrest, Neruda had to escape Chile by crossing the impassable Andes Mountains on horseback. Slashing through dense, pathless forests and navigating these immense, desolate cliffs of snow, he had to rely entirely on his companions to guide him to liberty. And it was exactly this harrowing escape that gave him his ultimate revelation. Decades later, in his stunning 1971 Nobel Prize acceptance speech, he shared what he learned. There is no insurmountable solitude. The sheer danger and the deafening silence of the Andes taught him that through our shared struggles, we realize we belong to a common destiny. We literally have to pass through isolation to reach the place where we can sing our song to others. Which brings us to our final section, the gift to read. So what's the big takeaway here? These 3 radically different masters show us the true gift of reading. Alice Munro teaches us to find monumental importance in the quiet, mundane moments of our daily lives. Cormac McCarthy strips away our comforts, forcing us to confront the absolute bleakest frontiers of human nature. And Pablo Neruda takes our deepest, darkest isolation and transforms it into a bridge that unites us. Whether we are navigating Munro's psychological fogs, McCarthy's desolate roads, or Neruda's isolating forests, they all masterfully turn their private observations into a vehicle for shared human growth. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to mull over today. When you look at the narrative of your own life, which of these literary lenses best helps you make sense of your story? Are you living in the quiet, profound details of Munro, the harsh, resilient survival of McCarthy, or the journey from isolation to connection of Neruda? Take a moment and really think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep reading deeply.